Have you ever stopped to think about how a single, kind of dusty old document can basically unlock the entire story of a community? Well, today, we're doing just that. We're looking at the 1840 U.S. Census for a place called Octobeha County, Mississippi. And you'll see how a simple list of names and numbers paints this incredibly vivid and, honestly, pretty startling picture of the past. So let's dive in. It all kicks off with this moment of pure discovery. I mean, just imagine that feeling. You're sifting through what you think is just old paperwork, and then it hits you. You're holding a direct link to a world that's long gone. That's the journey we're about to go on. So, get this. The whole thing started because of a mistake in facts. A paper about Choctaw treaties ends up on the wrong desk. It lands in front of someone who gets its importance, even though the person it was meant for had no idea it was connected to her own family's story. And that one little accident sparked the big question. What are these documents really telling us? So that accidental discovery, that's what really sets our course today. Because before we can even begin to understand the census of 1840, we have to understand the land it was counting, and maybe more importantly, the stories that were already being erased. Okay, so to get a handle on this 1840 census, you gotta ask, where did Octobeha County even come from? I mean, this place didn't just slowly evolve. No. It was a super rapid, really dramatic transformation of land that had belonged to the Choctaw Nation for generations. And these are President Andrew Jackson's own words to Congress. This wasn't some kind of hidden agenda. The policy of Indian removal was openly talked about as a way to get population, wealth, and power for white settlers. This quote right here, it sets the stage for absolutely everything that follows. And just look at how fast this all went down. In May of 1830, the Indian Removal Act gets signed. Just 4 months later, the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek is signed, and a massive chunk of territory is ceded. And then boom, by the end of 1833, Octobeha County officially exists. A nation was displaced and a new county was born, all in just over 3 years. Okay, so now let's turn to the census itself. Because this document, it wasn't just a neutral snapshot of the time. It was a tool. And it was designed with the very specific values and biases of 1840 America. Its structure reveals a lot more than just population counts. You know, to really understand a document like this, you have to look at the form itself. Professional genealogists often say you should ask one simple question: what do the columns say? And for the 1840 census, the answer is incredibly revealing. Just look at this comparison. It's night and day. For free white persons, the census taker is recording super detailed age brackets, breaking down families into small increments. But for enslaved people, the brackets are totally different. They're wide, and they just so happen to align perfectly with stages of life defined by labor: childhood, prime working years, and older age. And let's be clear, this was not an accident. The very design of this form tells a story. One population was seen as families, as citizens. The other was viewed through the cold, hard math of an economic system built on human bondage. So with all that in mind, let's finally look at the actual numbers for Octobeha County. Because this is where the abstract data starts to tell some very concrete and frankly very powerful stories. In 1840, just 7 years after it was created, the total population of Octobeha County was 4,276 people. But honestly, that total, it's not the real story. The real story is in the breakdown. And here it is. This is probably the single most stunning fact from this entire document. The majority of the population, 51.4%, were enslaved people. In this brand new county, built on former Choctaw land, the enslaved actually outnumbered the free. And the data also shows just how widespread this was. Of the 368 white households in the county, a clear majority, 198 of them, held people in bondage. So this wasn't just an institution for a handful of rich planters. It was woven deep into the fabric of the community. But then, buried inside all that data, one number really stands out because it tells us something really interesting about the society's structure. And that number is 14. So what does 14 represent? It's the number of households headed by women who were also listed as slaveholders. Now, why does this matter? Well, because these 14 women really challenge that simple story we sometimes hear about women being just confined to the home. No, they were property owners, and they were active participants in the economic system of slavery. It just complicates our whole understanding of gender and power back then. But, for everything the census tells us, it's just as important to think about what it leaves out. The empty spaces in the record, well, they tell their own powerful story. And really, this is what it all boils down to. The census recorded the names of 368 heads of household. They got a permanent identity in the history books. But thousands of other people, living in the exact same place, were made anonymous, reduced to nothing more than a tick mark in a column. And that leaves us with this final, really haunting question. We can analyze the data of those 2,197 enslaved people, but we can never, ever get their names, their relationships, or their individual stories from this one document. The census gives us this stark black and white picture of a county, but it's the stories that are hidden behind the numbers that really challenge us to keep digging.